This video is brought to you by Axo Copper.
Hello, welcome back to Mining Network. It's a pleasure to be joined with Marc Faber today, Dr. Doom and the author of Gloom, Boom and Doom. Dr. Marc Faber, good to be with you. Just to start things off, Marc, I thought we'd start with something a bit more lighthearted. Obviously, you've been in the industry a long time. You're one of the most well-recognized contrarian investors in this space. Looking back over your career, what's one of the main highlights that you can reflect on?
Well, I started to work in 1970, and certainly an important event occurred in August 71 when we had the closure of the gold window in America, and I think it allowed a less disciplined monetary approach and more money printing or endless money printing. And as you know, in the 70s, inflation took off, largely in consumer prices. And in the 80s, 90s, and up to recently, we had more asset inflation. In other words, the opening of China and also other formerly socialist communist countries increased the quantity of goods and services in the world, and that kept prices of goods and services in check. They increased, but not as rapidly as in the 70s. So, what is commonly called the rate of inflation, which is consumer prices, slowed down until essentially 2020, 21. And since then, we had an acceleration of inflation. And along with this movement in prices, we had the process of disinflation after 1980-81, whereby interest rates, which had been on the treasury, the 10 years treasury, over 15% in 1981, we dropped to approximately 0.5% in the year 2020. And since then, we've kind of increased slowly. But in my view, we're not very high on interest rates on treasury bonds. I mean, we are at the 10 years is around 4%. But the rate of inflation, in my view, is over 4%. And I define inflation differently than the Federal Reserve and the Bureau of Labor Statistics. In general, prices have gone up a lot in the world, or I could say the purchasing power of paper money has gone down a lot. I mean, just to state the obvious, in the 1970s, it was said there are essentially 1 or 2 billionaires in the world. The Getty family and Mr. Ludwig. But nowadays, to be a billionaire is nothing special. There's so many of them. There are some that have a little bit more than a billion, but it's nothing. I mean, if someone introduced someone in the 80s as a billionaire, people were really impressed. Nowadays, a billionaire is quite common. You go to Miami, you go to New York, you go to Hong Kong, Singapore, everybody who walks on the street is a billionaire.
In terms of when you're looking back to 55 years ago in the 70s, you're looking at this high interest rate environment. It feels like we can't get back there. The US is already paying about 20% of its tax revenue just repaying debt. It is there a bit of sense in terms of why Trump wants interest rates lower, or is this really kicking the can down the road yet more again?
You know, there are different views about economics. It's like there are different religions in the world. I believe the best is a free market. And I'm not saying the capitalistic system hasn't got any drawbacks and any disadvantages, but compared to other systems that can be abused very easily, the capitalistic system is probably the best, the optimal system where people reach a high degree of freedom. I think we have to define what kind of a system or society do we want to live in. Do we want to live in a society where we are relatively free to do what we want? Or do we want to live in a society where some clown at the top tells you we have tariffs and we have these restrictions here and those restrictions there, and so forth and so on. So, I mean, these are philosophical questions, state philosophy, that need to be addressed. What do you really want? But my view is that if I look at the world the way it was in 1970, when China wasn't a factor, Russia wasn't a factor in the global economy, and Vietnam wasn't the factor, and so was India. Nobody talked about India. And now I look at these countries, and from the day they moved from the socialist communist ideology into the free market ideology, these countries all took off. And I can, in good conscience, say that in countries like Vietnam, India, China, everybody is better off today than they were under the communist socialist regimes. Everybody's better off. I can't say that of countries in Europe where we have moved from a free market economy at the beginning of the 20th century to a socialist government that we have today, with lots of restrictions, and that brought about actually lower standards of living for most people. I'm not talking about the 0.01% of the billionaires. Their standard of living always goes up. But in China, India, and so forth, we have made great progress. So I think that I can actually make a very strong case for free markets and democracy and freedom of people. And actually, people that are more intelligent than I have written books on the subject, you know, like Schumpeter, capitalism, socialism, and democracy. And these are very important works, and one has to think it through what is best for the majority of people. And so my view would be that the current economic policies in the US are actually a complete disaster, are horrible, a travesty. And only someone who is a complete ignorant person in economic matters could put them forward, these policies, and recommend them and implement them.
Especially, I want to mention especially this new copper tariff, the 50% tariff on copper. I, I can't for the life of me think how that's going to benefit anyone, and surely not the US. Surely this is just something that's going to slow their own growth.
Basically, a tariff such as that the Trump team implements is like a sales tax, nothing else,
Yeah, exactly.
and is a stupid sales tax, an unfair, stupid sales tax.
But why do you think he's gone after copper in particular? Because when you look at things like copper, it's usually linked to GDP growth. It's used in pretty much every appliance that has electronic current. In terms of the housing market, in terms of electronics, you're really just subjecting the American people, surely, to much higher prices and inflation, right?
Well, to answer your question, why, my answer is, and I have to say, I would have voted for Mr. Trump twice, and I would vote for him a third time because the alternatives are so bad. But why Copper? The simple answer is he's deranged, economically deranged. That's why.
Hi, I'm Jonathan Aguilo. My colleagues and I have been behind 7 mining success stories over the past 20 years in Mexico, most recently being Go Gold and Silver Tiger with a combined value of more than $1 billion. 3 years ago, we formed Axo Copper. On June 4th, we IPO'd on the TSXV under the trading symbol AXO. Our La Huerta project is a recently producing high-grade copper mine in Jalisco, Mexico. When we picked up the project, previous operators had only mined to 50 meters depth and about 150 meters along strike. For us, the opportunity came to test the scale of the project, which we've already begun. The drilling has already achieved intercepts including 13.7 meters at 5% copper and 7.6 meters at over 7% copper, testing mineralization to a depth of 200 meters. We've tracked the system to 5 kilometers along strike from surface sampling. We believe there are all the signs for there to be multiple high-grade copper systems within our 11,000 hectare license. We've just raised $11.5 million Canadian and have started a 15,000 meter drill program, with about 70% of that focused on the existing mine area and 30% to test regional targets. Over the next 12 months, we plan to test the scale of the project, giving us the information required to assess at what rate the mine should be restarted. As a new company, we would be honored to have you follow our journey as we test this new emerging high-grade copper district.
Yeah. How disappointed are you with Trump? Obviously, I think most people who were voting for him were expecting a smaller government, reduction. Obviously, we had the Doge department. We were expecting waste cuts, slashing of sort of the deficit. It doesn't really seem like what he promised is now going to be delivered. As someone who would have voted for him, I mean, it seems like no matter who you vote for now, you're going to get the same thing.
Yeah. No matter who you work for, you get an idiot. That is correct. I spell it out, but it's true. It's a disaster, the choices that we have. But I never expected anything from Mr. Trump because in his first terms, he also came in and promised numerous things. And what did he do? Nothing. Nothing. He played golf. But I always say, I love politicians that don't do a thing. The problem is now, in his current frame of mind, he's convinced that he's doing the right thing. You know, he's a fanatic in his beliefs of protectionism. And that is actually quite dangerous.
I'm looking at the market, so it seemed like bonds sort of have come back a little bit from where they were when they first announced tariffs the first time around, the reciprocal tariffs. It seems to be a little bit better than where they were then. Obviously, the stock market's doing extremely well.
I want to clarify the statement. The stock market has done fantastically well. Yes, in dollars. But you measure it against the euro. Since Trump became president, the stock market expressed in foreign currencies is down. Number two, expressed in gold, silver, platinum is down. So we have to clarify the statement. The stock market has done fantastically well. In nominal terms, yes, but not in real terms.
I was going to ask, is this purely down to a weaker US dollar? And is it now more attractive for foreign investors to own the US stock market? Is that what we're seeing here?
I think, personally, I think the dollar has a long way to go down. And the observation I would like to make is Trump is a gift of God for people who are short the dollar and long precious metals and long cryptocurrencies, but mostly for precious metals holders. He's a gift of God. And every Christian should go and pray every day in the church that he stays alive for a long time. Because believe me, under Mr. Trump, the dollar will lose more of its purchasing power than ever before in the last 100 years, and is already lost 97%. So under Trump, the dollar loss of purchasing power, in my opinion, will accelerate.
What's behind the acceleration in your view?
Well, it's very simple. I think when, say, I'm an investor, I have a bond portfolio, I have a stock portfolio, I have a precious metals portfolio. I diversify in different assets. Now, when I buy or invest in fixed interest securities, the most important consideration is the willingness of the people I borrow money, that I lend money to repay. You understand? I buy bonds from a company or from a government. Is this government willing to pay the interest on the debt, or is it not willing to pay the interest on the debt? And Mr. Trump, you look at his history in business, he's never cared about creditors. He's never cared about people he borrowed money from. That is not a concern for him. The only thing that he's concerned about is how do I not pay my debts without any major damage to myself.
Is there a risk, obviously, with that mindset, that eventually we're going to see the US dollar not sort of shift away from a reserve currency? We're starting to see quite a lot of countries now preferring to, or where they can, try to trade in things other than the US dollars. It's still quite difficult, but it seems like this central bank gold buying over the last few years is almost gearing up for that eventuality of being less reliant on US dollars.
Yes, I think you're touching on a very important subject. Of course, the dollar will become worthless. That is easy to see. The question is when, and it can last a long time. And the public can be misinformed by the media and by the government and so forth. I mean, the government is nowadays in Western democracy an institution of a nest of lying vipers. They lie about everything. Now, the Trump, he came in the administration, this is a typical example, with the intention to publish the Epstein files, okay? Everybody was expecting that he would clean up the dirt, the deep state, the filth that is going on in Washington and so forth and so on. And what happened now is there is some inconvenient truth in those files. So what does the government do? They're not going to publish them. They even deny that they exist.
Yeah. No, well,
It's a bunch of liars.
I mean, it is funny how the rhetoric has changed from that pre-election to post, and something else that they have mentioned, obviously post-election, was Fort Knox and doing the audits. It somehow that seems to have quietened down quite a bit. We were hosting a webinar last week where fund manager Ned Leyland, who runs Jupiter, was essentially saying that he believes there is no gold in Fort Knox, and that is an announcement that we're going to see. What's your view?
I mean, my view is that the dollar is no longer the reserve currency, because the reserve currency should be a store of value. I don't think the dollar is a store of value anymore. And if I look at the movement of currencies and of assets in the world, I believe we are in a stage of significant monetary inflation that will have to accelerate to keep the system going. And in that environment, in my view, we are moving already now back to a gold standard or metal standard, gold, silver, platinum standard. Exactly how it will transition into that standard, I don't know. But this is my view. And I think individuals make a huge mistake by saying, I don't trust the financial market anymore. I want to hold cash. Because the cash is no longer what cash is supposed to be. The central banks have destroyed the instrument of cash as an instrument of safety. What is safe is gold, provided it is held in a safe place. And that safe place is out of reach of government officials. The government would like nothing better than to seize the gold and the assets of individuals.
I wouldn't mind just even looking, say, 1 year ahead of us. Say, for example, Besant comes in as the Fed chair. He lowers interest rates. What are you predicting next year if they do lower interest rates? What sort of market do you expect us to be in?
Yes, it's a good question, because I was just thinking, looking at the market action, the stock market action today, I think there is a chance that the Fed will have to increase interest rates. They can't lower them. And Milton Friedman, he said it rightly. The Fed does not control interest rates. They may control the Fed fund rate. And as you know, we've had last September cuts in the Fed fund rate. And so far this year, not many. But the bond market hasn't reacted positively. In fact, the market participants are ultra bearish about bonds. The short position in bonds is gigantic. And I also have a bond portfolio. I'm not that bearish about bonds, because I think the economy is a disaster already. It's all money printing and government spending and so forth, and artificial stimulus, when the typical household is actually suffering, because his cost of living are going up much more rapidly than his wages, and his assets. Say you look at Canadian and US real estate markets, they're no longer going up, they're actually coming off, because the affordability is not there. Is very unusual in economics. The market goes up, but the volume dries out because nobody can afford it. That and everybody says this peasant is like a genius because he was working for Soros. I haven't seen anything genius from him at all. He may be a genius, but I haven't seen it yet.
As well, that isn't just in the US or Canada. It's throughout all of Europe as well.
I tell you, I think it's only a question of time. The monetary system, such as we have, has to be supported by accelerating money creation all the time to be sustainable. The money printing doesn't go on, you have a crisis, for sure. Massive. And I don't know how it will end, but I know that when it ends or when the disaster strikes, I rather own gold than cash deposits with some bank or some questionable, highly priced stocks.
Yeah. Well, it's like you said.
I also happen to think, I've just been thinking about this before we started the interview. I think foreign exchange controls will be inevitable.
Perhaps. Yeah. Yeah. That's. And I think you're right in terms of, well, why would you hold cash at the moment when, like you said, inflation is increasing larger than wages? If you're holding cash, you're essentially just losing money year on year. So there's just no point anymore. One of the things that I guess with gold, usually people say high prices fix high prices, low price fix low prices, etc. Obviously, gold is at all-time highs near there or thereabouts. I think it's about 3,300 today. Are we at a risk of, where gold is relatively expensive to where it was, that it's not really drawing in as much, or it could dampen retail demand, and really what's underpinning this is central bank demand? So is gold really now just tied to central bank purchases? So if they carry on going up, great. If they do eventually drop, what could that spell for gold? Or is there a deeper thematic underneath this?
Well, you touch on a subject which I've been pondering about for a long time. In monetary inflation, in other words, in a system where the quantity of money goes up and so forth, and I give you an example. The interest rates today are much higher than 3 years ago. We all agree on that. They've gone from zero, essentially. In the US, the treasury yield at the low was 0.51%, and now we're 4.4%, whatever. Has money tightened, or is money easier today than it ever was before? If you tell me the Fed pursued a tight monetary policy, to this I respond, it's very strange that if money is tight, the stock market makes new highs. It's very unusual. I mean, it is maybe not impossible, but it would be very unusual. Number two, the economic literature is very clear about that. The absolute level of interest rates does not tell you whether money is tight or not. In Turkey and Argentina, we had interest rates of around 100% per annum, and monetary policy was expansionary. So we have to be very careful in the definition of what is money, when is money tight or not. In my view, inflation is much higher than what is being published. I give you an example. In Switzerland, the government will tell its citizens, we don't have inflation. But you go and read the international surveys by McKinsey and all these institutes of clever and educated people that went to universities, they will tell you that the price level of the most expensive cities is the highest in Geneva, Zurich, Bern, and so forth. So if we have no inflation, how come we have the highest price level in the world? Maybe because our food is better than anywhere else, or the efficiency or the friendliness of the Swiss people. But I'm telling you, economics is very complex. And to your question, is the price of gold high or low? I don't have the answer, but I don't care if I prepare for a financial crisis, what do I care if it's expensive or not? I care about owning it after the crisis ends. And I can tell you, in the next crisis, a lot of people, including, say, out of the 100 richest people, 50% will be gone. Gone. Because in a crisis, things happen that are very bad. I mean, you can't imagine the people in China before the communists arrived were rich beyond the dream, because it's a country with 1 billion people. So the few people that controlled things, they were immensely rich, relatively speaking. The communists came, everything zero. The communists came in Eastern Europe and Russia, everything zero. The zero is a common occurrence in history, that entire cities, countries, people, industries go bust.
Yeah. Well, it seems like we're almost
And
on our
I
way.
want, in that situation, I mean, I'm not sure gold will be very helpful, because they might take it away from you. That's why I say you have to have it in a safe place. But even if you have it in a safe place, it could be that you will lose your life. That I want to stress. You know, the climate nowadays, this is what I'm answering when people ask me, what do you think about the stock market? Well, some stock markets are cheap, like Brazil and Hong Kong and China, and the Asian markets are not terribly expensive. But the US, considering the geopolitical problems, the domestic problems, the economic situation with its debt, and the inability of politicians to actually cut down the debt or increase taxation, this inability. Given all these conditions, I don't think the stock market should be where it is.
We spoke back in November at the Precious Metal Summit, and you mentioned then that platinum was looking likely to be one of the next metals to move. Roll forward 9 months, and platinum's finally starting to move. I was just wondering if you had any price predictions moving forward on the metal.
When you ask me about the price of gold, is it expensive or low? I can tell you, in monetary inflation, the difficulty is to determine what the price is. Now, I can say that in the precious metals market, platinum is incredibly low relative to gold. And I told you at that time, it was in November 2024, platinum was around $850 an ounce. I pointed out that it was approaching a more than 120 years low vis-a-vis the price of gold. And in my view, the bull market in platinum has just started, and it will go. Now it trades at a huge discount. Say gold is over 3,000 and platinum is 1,300, whatnot. In my view, the bull market within 12 to 18 months will propel the platinum price to more than the gold price, so more than 3,000. And I tell you why. I think I'm going to travel around the world and tell some dumbed down central banks. They believe anything, if you're old, you can tell them anything. I will tell them that platinum is very easy to squeeze. Actually, if Besant had any brains, the Fed chair, he would, the Treasury Secretary, he would accumulate, he would issue dollars, print dollars, and buy gold and platinum and silver. and squeeze these markets.
Yeah.
And the platinum market is easy to squeeze, much easier than the silver market. They squeezed the silver market in 1980, 79 to 80, but the platinum market is very limited. If I were Putin in Ramaphosa in South Africa, I would squeeze the platinum market.
Interesting. And that
If I were Qatar or Dubai or the Emirates or Saudi Arabia, I would buy up all the platinum and squeeze it up to $10,000 an ounce.
Yeah, it's not a bad idea. And then maybe try and pay off some debt with the inflated gains that you've just made. That's not a bad shout. Mark, I really appreciate your time. Thank you very much. And hopefully we'll catch up again in the future.
Well, thank you very much. And I wish your viewers and listeners all the best. Are you coming to this conference in Zurich in November?
Yeah, we'll be back in Zurich. We'll also be going to the Beaver Creek one in Colorado in September as well. So if you can get out there, that'd be great.
See you then.